Yo, this is Adrian from the Playoffs of Life podcast, here to sponsor Anchor so that you can find out what Anchor can do for you, as well as what it has already done for my life. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast, and let me explain. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will also distribute your podcast for you so that it can be heard on things like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Radio Public, and many other platforms. You can also make money off your podcast with no minimum listenership. And who doesn't like to make money with Anchor? It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So if you're interested, please download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. I'll repeat that. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Peace. Yo, what up, podcast people? This is your host, Adrian Hatcher, with another episode of the Playoffs of Life podcast. We are here today to talk about the play-in game. And what play-in game am I referring to? I am talking about the NBA playoff play-in game that happened just a few days ago, before the actual playoffs started. Today's episode title is going to be, was the play-in game worth it? And in my opinion, it was definitely worth it. We got to see Titans. We got to see amazing teams play their butts off for at least 1 to 2 games, not only to secure their spot, but to potentially get a higher seed in the actual playoffs itself. Some teams got knocked out pretty early, and other teams fought in battle to the last minute or last second in order to obtain their spot in the playoffs. Now, this year was very entertaining, mainly because a lot of the top teams that are at least playoff bound or championship contenders ended up in the playoff game, due to certain circumstances. Teams such as the Boston Celtics with a Jaylen Brown injury really rocked them, having Kemba Walker not produce at the level, we're used to seeing him also probably helped to knock them to those lower seeds. And then you had teams like the Golden State Warriors, which we knew from the very beginning we're going to probably struggle this year with not having one of their top 2 players in Klay Thompson, but we still believe having a Steph Curry would still get you in the playoffs. And we see how that turned out. The Los Angeles Lakers, with LeBron and AD's injury, the Lakers were falling down the seeds in a matter of weeks. They were losing games. They couldn't keep anything consistent. And AD and LeBron, we see, are such a big part into what the Lakers do that without them there, it was really hard for them to win those last few games of the year. Also, we had the pandemic. A lot of people in health and safety protocols for the NBA, which mean a lot of players either couldn't play or a lot of players had to sit out these last few games, where I believe if we didn't have those health and safety protocols, the playing game would have been even better. Like players such as Caris LeVert are the first to come to my mind when thinking of a player that would have made a drastic difference in those play-in games. But the teams that got to play were the Boston Celtics, the Washington Wizards, the Charlotte Hornets, the Indiana Pacers, Los Angeles Lakers, Memphis Grizzlies, I believe the Spurs, and the last team, Golden State Warriors. Those were all the teams in the playoff game. So those are a lot of teams. These teams had to compete, where they had to either win 1 to 2 games in order to secure a playoff spot for their team. Now, there were certain games that were technically blowouts, teams that just looked undermanned. One thing I can think of was the Memphis Grizzlies versus the Spurs. It just seems like the Spurs just didn't have enough. They were having a really bad shooting night, and everything just did not come together for them. And the Memphis Grizzlies were so determined. And as we see coming into the playoffs lately, the Memphis Grizzlies are a very underrated team. They are a lower seeded team, but don't let the lower seed mention fool you. These Memphis Grizzlies are ready to compete. They're young bucks that definitely want to show that they can be in the playoffs and they can make a lot of noise. Will they win it all? We don't know yet, but when you have a point guard such as Ja Morant, shooting guards such as Dylan Brooks, Kyle Anderson showing that he can ball, You have players coming back from injury such as Jaren Jackson. All-star centers such as Jonas Valanciunas. That's just their starting lineup. Their bench is really good too. When you have a team like that, they showed that they can beat any team, honestly. These last few games, they played the San Antonio Spurs, the Golden State Warriors, and then getting into the playoffs, they played the Utah Jazz. And so far to this date, they took game one pretty handily. Now, of course, Donovan Mitchell was missing, but man, like no one expected the Grizzlies to really get a game. Probably even with Donovan Mitchell leaving, they never would have expected a 7-game series. But in my opinion, I can see a 7-game series. And then you have teams that lost. I already talked about the San Antonio Spurs, but the Golden State Warriors, they battled. In both games where they faced Memphis and the Lakers, they practically had the game at certain points. They could have won it. It was just a difference in a couple plays, a couple missed baskets, a couple things not going their way. That really determined the game, especially the Lakers game. That Lakers game, the Lakers could have been bounced out of the playoffs entirely this year if the Golden State Warriors could have took care of business. But LeBron came back just in time. AD was back already, and they did what they had to do to get in the game. And we can always talk about in another pod how the Lakers are looking in the playoffs right now. Because so far, it's kind of shaky, but I don't really want to doubt LeBron James at this point. You really never want to go against the king. And then we got teams such as the Indiana Pacers, who looked like heavyweights, probably underrated, just like the Memphis Grizzlies, but definitely talented. They had bad luck. Like I said, Caris LeVert didn't play the play-in games, mainly because of health and safety protocols. I believe that was a big loss. They got Malcolm Brogdon back for the play-in games, but when you're sitting out so many games and you come back at the last minute, you kind of got to get your rhythm, get your play right. And even though he contributed, it was just hard to really give enough to push against the team that you were playing against, but I believe they did a great job with the talent they had. And Sabonis showed, all-star caliber. This man was putting up ridiculous numbers. It's one reason why I definitely believe if they make a couple of trades, acquire probably another high-level player and round out their bench, I really feel like they'll compete next year, and they'll definitely be in the playoffs with everything, going their way. Injuries, not pertaining to their season and stuff. But we'll see next season. They did such a great job in playing game. And then teams like the Washington Wizards. I ain't going to lie. I was really hating against the Washington Wizards, mainly because my Chicago Bulls needed the Wizards to lose, like, almost all of their last 3 games in order for them to even have a chance to be in the play-in. And, you got to give it to the Washington Wizards. They played their butts off. Bradley Beal, Russell Westbrook, triple-double machine. Bradley Beal giving you like up to 25 to 40 points a game. Their bench came up big. Ish Smith, Raul Neto. Daniel Gafford has been a revelation really for that team. Really showed that he can be a starter in this league. Getting the minutes he deserves, up to 20, 25 minutes a game at this point. And in the playoffs, his first game, he showed why he should be picked up. He produced for his team, and him and that Russell Westbrook tandem, that their high energy play just kind of rubs off on the team. They play really beautiful basketball at that point. Davis Bertans, just role players stepping up for those playing games. It was beautiful to see. And of course, other teams like the Charlotte Hornets, they didn't really do too much. They kind of got blown out on that playing game. They're a really young team. They got some young gunners, but it just didn't. And all the pieces came together. LaMelo's still pretty young, and depending on him and Terry Rozier, just doesn't seem like the thing that's going to get you to the playoffs. They got to the point of a playing game, but I always feel like there's more that needs to happen with that team. So going over all those teams, I hope I didn't leave a team out. Probably did, honestly, but I just really want to dissect what the playing game brought to the NBA. And I think it brings such a new dynamic to how we're supposed to look at the NBA at this point. If you think about it, there's nothing that the NBA has done this year that can't be replicated. And what I mean by that is the play-in game. We didn't have an all-star game, but things other than the play-in game, the health and safety protocols, those can still be implemented, but less strenuous. People are getting vaccinated. They're allowing players to actually live their life more, actually have an opportunity to go and de-stress from games. They're not stuck in rooms all day. They're not doing things like always have to constantly work out or stay distant from family and friends. Next year should be better in terms of the things they implemented, but also keeping those things in case of positive COVID cases, while also bringing us just great basketball. And the play-in game was mainly brought up to find ways to bring money back to the NBA. And there was so much viewership with the play-in games because of the teams that ended up there, and how one loss could mean you're kicked out the playoffs, or, just the underdog mentality that a lot of teams had. And it really shone a bright spot and put those teams in the spotlight that needed to be there. And I really appreciate the NBA for doing that. So in my opinion, it was definitely worth it to have a play-in game this year. Looking at how each game came out, there were so many more interesting games than there were ever blowouts. So I see the NBA doing it next year for, of course, 2022. And I would love to see top-level teams there, but seeing top-level teams there means that something probably went wrong during the season. But even for those teams that are up and coming and just trying to make a playoff, imagine a team such as my Chicago Bulls next year having to fight for a play-in spot, and they play a top-level team such as a Brooklyn Nets team. Think of how dramatic that would be. That's just an example, probably not the best example, but in my opinion, that would be beautiful basketball that needed to be seen. And I really want Zach LaVine and Nikola Vucevic and the rest of the Bulls players on the team to really experience what a playoff game is like. So with that being said, I will be dropping a podcast in another few days about the results of the playoffs so far. There are a lot of dramatic stories. One story that probably will be really quick that I can talk about now is the Celtics and Nets matchup. It's probably the only matchup in the playoffs that seems uneven in terms of talent, where you don't really give them a shot, not even really a game at this point. I believe Brooklyn's up like 2-0 in the playoffs, and I really wouldn't want to talk about the Celtics. The minute they lost Jaylen Brown, it just felt like a lost season for them. They did so much to get there, and they lost him at such a pivotal point, like where they needed to peak at their best. And it really just brought me down to see a team injured and not being able to fight to their fullest. So I really don't see that series really going anywhere. Of course, the Nets are supposed to be championship contenders, so whether they were healthy or not, they're supposed to destroy the Celtics, or they're supposed to at least make it competitive, but still pull out the wins and make it to the next round, But every other matchup, I think I'll definitely be talking about soon in the playoffs, because every other matchup just seems more competitive, different storylines. I can't wait to talk about the Atlanta Hawks and New York Knicks. That's going to be a whole pod. So with that being said, thank you guys for listening. I appreciate you for hopping on the pod. Follow me on all my social media platforms. I'll leave a link in the description if anybody wants to follow any of those. On my Facebook, Instagram. I also am creating a homepage, a website, if you want to follow me on there too. That will be coming soon though. And we're just going to keep this going, and we're going to drop NBA content, and we're going to make it happen. We're going to definitely get into the playoffs, since this podcast is called Playoffs of Life. So I will see you guys later. Peace.